Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and I'll be looking at a Gameweek 8 Wildcard draft template. I'll be looking at two kind of separate draft concepts, and the idea behind both draft concepts is whether or not you want to strengthen your midfield or strengthen your attack. And the idea, of course, is based on the fact that Lukaku is fit and he's fine. Now, of course, there was slight injury concerns after the game versus France, where unfortunately Belgium lost. But I think since then, there might have been rumors that Lukaku and Hazard might have been resting the games because they didn't really feel the game versus Italy was that consequential to them. But we have to kind of stay updated on that. I think the idea behind this draft is that you keep Lukaku in your team, and the idea is you either choose between someone who's a much stronger midfielder like Son, or maybe you go for a much more well-rounded team and keep someone who's still relatively strong in the midfield, such as a Man City asset like Foden. But just before the video starts, this is a perfect time to shout out OneFootball as well. It's a fantastic football app that's available for both Android and iPhone users, and you can basically use it to do whatever you want as a football fan. You can trim your notification settings to as minimal as possible. You can also get as much in-depth information as you want flowing to you in real time. The point of the app really is to get all the kind of information that you want all in one place. So let's say you want to see the statistical analysis of a player, how well a player played, what kind of lineup a team set up in a specific match. You can find that there for international fixtures, for Champions League fixtures, or even domestic Premier League fixtures, or any kind of top flight European league and more. On top of that, you kind of get in-depth news of players. For example, look at the international break. Players like Rudiger, Jota, and even Lukaku have been missing games, and all the updates are provided to you within the app. I'd really appreciate it if you guys checked out the link in the description below. Without further ado, let's actually have a look at the first kind of wildcard team. And of course, the preferred wildcard team for this week, I think, and going forwards in the future for me, is going to be one that includes Son in my draft. I just think Son provides a lot more security than someone like Foden does in terms of the draft, because even though I think Foden clearly is first choice now for Pep, the issue, of course, is the rotation aspect of things. And when you actually look into, let's say, Man City's priorities for the future, I think you'd have to say that Man City probably will be focusing a little bit more on the Champions League. Sorry, this is just due to the fact that they lost to PSG recently, and Club Brugge has actually kind of accumulated quite a good position in the group so far. And of course, I think the priority now is to make sure that they get out of groups while a little bit of rotation might happen in the team. For example, someone like Zinchenko could be coming into the side. But let's actually start off with the defense first, right? Because I think this is a situation where I think everyone is set on Ramsdale being a keeper, and I think that's totally fine. Having an Arsenal keeper at a 4.6 price is fantastic. Even if you got him a little bit later than most, that's totally fine. Having Ramsdale now. I actually have White in my team, and so that's an Arsenal double up that you're going to be staring at right now. You have 0.1 million in the bank, and I think the idea is that I'm giving you a little bit more flexibility for choice, in the defensive aspect. You can actually move into a 4.5 midfielder, right? Someone from Wolves, for example, if you don't fancy an Arsenal double up, or you can just simply go for someone cheaper like Duffy at 4.3. Duffy, of course, is a fantastic defender. Now, with going Ramsdale, you obviously no longer have Sanchez as a keeper, and we know Brighton are still capable of getting clean sheets. They're a solid defensive side, and the beauty of Duffy is that he's actually been able to get onto a fantastic amount of headers. And when you look at his kind of historical statistics as a player, you'll see that he's probably one of the more prominent players in Europe in terms of kind of aerial prowess, right? And so I think it makes sense if you don't want to go for an Arsenal double up to actually go for Duffy in your team and maybe have that 0.2 million in the bank to kind of tinker around with a few assets. Livramento for me makes the most sense as that kind of fifth enabler in your team. I mean, he's come on so many times for me this season and been fantastic, whether it's providing an assist or a nearly assist or even just a clean sheet that's unexpected, for example, versus City. I think Livramento has been fantastic. It's someone that you should have definitely considered in your wildcard draft. Now's the time to move on from players like Williams and Omobamidele as an example. It's just not really worth it having those assets when you can kind of move your money up to someone like Livramento at 4.2. I think the reason why I have Diaz here and I have 0.1 in the bank is basically it comes down to risk, right? Whether or not you want to play the kind of roulette in a sense where when Zinchenko comes back and is totally fit, you have the capacity to have someone who is much more effective on let's say, a points per game basis than Diaz. But Diaz is someone who offsets that by playing consistent amount of games and much more minutes, right? So if you looked at last season, for example, Cancelo was playing 2,000 minutes a season, Walker around 1,800, 1,900 with a little bit of injury issues in between, and Zinchenko with injuries was actually only still playing 1,200 minutes. And there was capacity, for example, if you looked at the end of the season to actually argue that Zinchenko was someone who's much more preferred by Pep on the left back position. And I think that is the slight risk for me, right? There could be a situation where maybe Walker comes in, starts games, Zinchenko starts games too, and Cancelo finally gets that time to rest. And that will be an interesting kind of thing, and something that will definitely hurt Cancelo users. Whereas with Diaz, you have the same safety in a sense as Rudiger, with exception to injury, right? And I think, we have Rudiger now, but of course there's some kind of niggling injury concerns with Germany. I think he's still with the German national team right now, but I think the size of the injury isn't very huge. Hopefully he actually makes it for the Brentford game. But this also makes me confident, for example, making sure that you kind of set your team for the future. I think Rudiger's injury is minor. You have enough kind of depth in terms of the defense to cover Rudiger for this week, and you're probably happy to keep him, inside your team for now. Hopefully Trent as well comes back. You have to kind of stay in tune to the injury news. Otherwise, you have full capacity, for example, to actually move into a draft like Cancelo and Diaz, right? If let's say Trent's injury news is much worse than imagined. But I'm kind of taking this as if everyone is fit to play and is more than likely going to be available at least for game week 9, if not for game week 8. In terms of the midfield, if you actually look into those pieces, I've still gone for Douglas Luiz, even though he's gone for a price rise to 4.6. The simple reason is I think Aston Villa are actually going to get most clean sheets this season. Luiz actually takes plenty shots on goal in terms of long shots. Yes, of course, most of them are not very effective and very kind of low XG kind of scoring chances, but I still think it's fantastic, right, to have an asset who can get maybe a consistent, let's say 3 or 4 points per game if he's coming off your bench. And I think he is probably a more solid asset, especially since Alan is going into a rougher patch of fixtures. And of course, we know the news with Bissouma lately, so you definitely need to make sure that he's probably out of your team. With Gallagher, of course, he's been an enabler that we've been discussing this season, where he's a fantastic asset because of the fact that he's so talismanic for the team, and also, has an imprint on the game regardless of the situation. I think, the fact that he's on set pieces is huge for Crystal Palace. A lot of people have been very kind of complimentary of his performances, and I would be as well. I think Crystal Palace have showed a lot of fight this season. They've battled for a lot of draws so far, but I think they've actually underperformed their expectations. I think defensively they're actually quite a solid team, so you might be able to get some clean sheet bonus points from Gallagher. And on top of that, as we've said, he has been quite effective on attack. And when you actually look at the heat maps, he pretty much plays as a 10 for Crystal Palace, whilst actually playing centre mid most of the time. Son, I think, is basically the diamond in this kind of draft, right? You're basically building this team to have enough enablers to actually allow for Son to be in your team. And simply put, I think we've seen that Son has been fantastic, even regardless of the fact that Tottenham have been very, very poor in recent times. And I think the fact that he's done so well, in spite of the fact that the team playing so poor, maybe not even getting enough possession at times, means that he has to be that piece that you have to consider him for your draft. And I love Son as a player, and that's also why he featured in my Game Week 1 draft. I just think it's just a matter of time before, let's say, Nuno finds the right philosophy to attack and approach this team. I'm not expecting Spurs to find, let's say, a top 4 finish this season, but it's going to be probably similar to last season, where one of the talismans or two of the talismans are going to find ways to haul regardless of the results. And I think Son is going to be one of those key assets, just like last year. In terms of Rafinha, I think we don't need to discuss more about him. I think if you've been watching football for the last few weeks, even on the international fixtures, you'll see that he's been super effective for Brazil, getting 2 assists in his first game and kind of also being involved in all 3 goals. I think he's basically a talismanic player and someone who we know passes the eye test surprisingly well, and I think has also benefited a little bit from Bamford maybe missing out from the team, because when Bamford is not in the team, there's less of people occupying central spaces, and this allows Rafinha to drift inside and also kind of occupy and dominate at times, kind of moving into that 10 position. That's very interesting for me, but I think, of course, with Bamford coming back, I still think Rafinha is going to be super effective. You can see the fact that he takes fantastic crosses, great set pieces as well, and his kind of in-swinging pass, cut inside kind of cross is a fantastic option for either goals or fantastic assists, right? When Leeds are actually able to kind of find their scoring boots. And at his price, I still think Rafinha is a fantastic option, and that also kind of leads us to Salah, right? Salah is someone who we have in our teams, and he has to be basically in our teams, I think, for the rest of the season, unless something unfortunate happens. I think there's even capacity for us to say that in the future we might even consider a double up of the Liverpool kind of premiums, right, where you go for let's say Salah and Mane if they continue to be as effective as they have so far. And I think Salah, which due to the fact that he has that slightly kind of additional assistive touch and the penalties as well, just means he's a fantastic option, and I wouldn't move him for the world, really. I mean, he probably is going to be a set and forget captaincy I've already missed out on a lot of Salah captaincies and regretted it, to be honest. And when we look over to someone like Lukaku. I think he's the only reason why you have him is for that kind of Norwich captaincy at Game Week 9. That seems very, very essential. Lukaku, of course, is an interesting asset where I think, as you can see with the forwards, we've clearly gone for a little bit of a downgrade from Antonio, right? And I think the beauty of, let's say, someone like Lukaku is the fact that these fixtures are so lovely, for Chelsea, and he probably will still find his shooting boots. I think there's a slight worry where he hasn't really found his form under Tuchel, with exception to the first 2-3 games where he was able to score in each of them. And I think now's the time for Lukaku to actually find his form. The games are actually rather nice and rather easy. If you look at the Aston Villa game where he scored as well, I mean, he can score some worldies, right? And it's only a matter of time where, let's say, Chelsea finds some easier games to actually build more consistent, effective chances, and Lukaku benefits them because he's also been quite unlucky recently in terms of not getting assists, in terms of not getting goals. I've moved away from Antonio from this sort of draft, and I think the reason why is because clearly West Ham's fixtures are slowly going to turn for the worse. And yes, maybe missing out from Antonio is going to take a kind of big effective ownership hit from your team, but I think it's also clear to say that I think their best fixtures have somewhat passed them. And at the same time, I think Tony has been extremely inspiring, right? In terms of just watching Brentford play, how pivotal he is to the attacks. I actually think he's probably underperformed from an FPL perspective in terms of, let's say, assists and goals. And I think that will actually come in the near future. And I think you have someone like Son who basically offsets that, right? He probably pays the price and is kind of worth it when you kind of offset, let's say, Antonio from your team. And this could be the time where, for example, when you look at wildcards, I think the best thing to do is always to make sure you move away from the template ahead of time. And maybe right now it is the time to move away from Antonio, which is why I've considered moving away from him now. Hwang, of course, became that kind of last enabler, very much like Gallagher in your team, who basically is at a fantastic price at 5.6 stroke 5.7. I think having Hwang in your team means that you basically have someone who hopefully could offset Jimenez's points for cheaper, right? We've seen lately that Bruno Lage has basically very much enjoyed, or Laga, sorry, has enjoyed playing Hwang as opposed to Traore from this kind of left inside forward position. I think he's done extremely well because he's a lot more clinical, and you can see it just in the goals, but also just in terms of the movements, right? Traore is very imprecise in terms of how he carries the ball. He pretty much becomes a de facto winger for the team at times and drifts towards the right, whereas Hwang is always looking to kind of move into the box diagonally and look for a beautiful shot across the face of the goal. And I think that's why I like Hwang so much, and I think he probably actually sits in both my wildcard teams, because as I move into wildcard team 2, you'll see that I actually have only 3 changes, and I'll discuss them very shortly here. The first is going to be in terms of defense. I think since you're bringing Foden into your team, it now actually calls for bringing in someone in your team who's much more maybe talismanic for in a different position, and actually that would be Cucurella, in place of, let's say, a 4.5 player such as White or even Duffy at 4.3, right? So Cucurella is what I would say to be supposed to be a shining star, right? Someone who came from Getafe in La Liga, who's very basically I'd argue to be like a box-to-box left mid, where he does a lot of defensive work, but also cracks in a fantastic amount of crosses. And if you're actually watching the last Brighton game for Arsenal, the reason why Cucurella got 3 bonus points is because he was cracking in fantastic amounts of kind of crosses that were not being guarded. And I think it's only a matter of time for him to actually find holes in terms of assists in FPL, due to the way that Brighton play. They're very kind of aerially dominant, and I think that really benefits Cucurella's crossing style. He'll also be able to be a bonus points magnet for most games, and I think ultimately, yes, while Brighton's fixtures are slowly turning for the worse, you can actually get a nice little differential piece there. Since I think we expect Brighton to have a very, solid mid-table performance this year, and I think, yeah, for the near future, you'll probably get very great performances from someone like Cucurella, who's playing versus Norwich. On top of that, I think you can clearly see that I've dropped Son for someone like Foden. I think Foden, as I said, is going to be that piece who seems to be that kind of nailed option for Pep. But I think there's the worry, of course, rotation, regardless of the fact that he's preferred, right? That's basically the worry that we have. But I think right now, in terms of form, you also have the opportunity to capitalize on the Burnley fixture, and that's why Foden sits in this team. We saw in the Liverpool game what he could do, and we, of course, saw him last year in terms of the Champions League, what he could do as well. So that's why Foden sits in the team. And I think this team also keeps Antonio in the side if you want to kind of measure that kind of effective ownership a little bit as well and not go for someone like Son. But that's really it for the video. I personally prefer Team 1 as a draft, because I'm probably now shifting back into the camp where I think that 3 at the back structure makes a lot more sense. just due to the fact that there's so much rotation in the Chelsea camp. And I think with Zinchenko coming back, maybe Cancelo's not that interesting to make sure that we kind of go for a quadruple defense. That's just my slight worry. I think just trying to play it safe. But I wish you guys the best of luck this week, and I'll see you guys in the next video.